Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Centerville Grace podcast, where every week we try to help you go deeper in your faith and make sure that you do not walk alone. Today is a special day. We have, for the very first time on the podcast,
Yes,
the one and only, actually, there's probably, four of you? Hank.
Yeah, four of us, yeah.
Hank
Yeah.
Hacker.
Yeah.
Yay.
Spring break just happened to align in the right place.
That's right.
So it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Hank is a full-time school teacher, and on his off hours, he's helping us out.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Hank, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here and what makes you tick, and we can go from there.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Hank. I teach at Greenview High School, and then I also, like you said, I'm here. I'm the worship director here, so I'm in charge of all things worship. Do all the scheduling things, get everyone where they need to be, and then try to lead our worship team in the same direction as our church. No one worships alone at Grace, so that's our kind of our thing, and we that's what makes me tick, is seeing people engage with God through our through the services, through our worship experiences, through worship nights that we do. So that's what I love to do.
That's right. And so you are married to one of our worship team members.
That's right. It's one of our worship leaders. She's the best we got. So I love her a lot.
You're not biased at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. But she's great. She's Sarah's one of our top singers, and I've loved her. We've served together for, oh gosh, I realized this year is my 10th year at Centerville Grace. And so we've served on the worship team together for like 6 of those years at least, 6 or 7 of those years. Yeah. So she sang for all of that time. I've done drums, and now I'm doing keys and more with that. So
it's great.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is, we got a lot of people in the worship team now that have grown into multiple skills. Right, out of necessity.
Absolutely.
Right? Sometimes it's been really cool to see. Like Krista, I was playing some bass guitar for it. Yep. You jump from drums to keyboards, which is not a small jump.
No, a pretty big one.
Yeah. A lot of our other worship leaders also play different instruments, so it's always cool to see how everybody is shifting around to just like play the right role, and like there's no egos in it at this point. It's just,
not at all.
What do we need? And that's really cool to see.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's been fun.
Yeah, that is cool. And you just bought a house?
Yes.
Yeah.
We closed today.
How exciting.
Yes. Not today. When does this?
Wednesday.
Well, so we closed. We closed 2 days ago. We're very excited about it. At this point, I have changed all the locks, and I have moved some stuff over into the garage.
That's cool.
So
that's cool. And I always like to say this. And for those who don't know, how old are you?
I am 23.
23, married.
Yeah.
School teacher, owns a house, I think, and works part-time at the church. I think that's
got a good start. So
it's still 2 more years until your front cortex is fully developed.
Yeah, right.
So you're doing really good.
You're doing great.
One of my favorite laws, and I still cannot rent a car.
That's funny.
Still cannot rent a car. I own a house. I cannot rent a car.
I own a car. My car for what it's worth.
Wow. Well, I'll sign for you if you rent a rental car. Holy cow. Well, Dust, tell us a little bit about what's happening at the church lately, what people can be looking forward to coming up, and how they can sign up for all that.
Yeah, so we have got men's retreat that is coming up, and men's pause retreat is coming up. We also have the women's restore retreat, so it is retreat season, as we like to say.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And man, there's no better way to really connect on a deep level with people and to do this kind of spiritual exercise with others than by attending one of those retreats. So we've got something for everybody there. I encourage you to sign up for those. You can sign up for all of them on centervillegrace.org/next steps. Aside from that, we're excited for Easter. We're starting to prep for that.
Yeah.
Which we're going to be celebrating some baptisms, which is that is our Super Bowl for the church, right?
Absolutely.
We are Easter people. We are resurrection people.
Yep.
And that is my favorite time of the year, is just the energy that comes with that. And I know you're preparing a message on, how do we live in light of the resurrection? What are the stories that we tell? What's our story as we relate to the Lord? So I'm excited for it, man.
Yeah. Looking for the next series, The Power of a Story.
Yeah.
We're going to all talk about all kinds of storytelling and how that's so important and impactful for people, because who doesn't love a good story, right? And that can move us and shape us and transform us. So
that's right.
Especially for true stories, as we believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. Well, very good. And men's group is going well, and really want to shout out to our guys for doing the men's group. And it's just great to see the guys longing for connection and finding it there. So I'm really excited about what's going on there.
Yeah.
So
right.
Good. Well, we talked on forgiveness this week.
Yeah.
Uh,
We mostly mean you.
well, I use the royal we there
That's
for all of us
I like that.
collectively.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been going through. If you haven't been watching with us or listening, we've been going through the love chapter, as it's called in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul defines perfect love basically, and what love is and what love does not do. So we got to the two, and I didn't really cover this, and so we can cover a little bit here.
Oh, that's perfect.
It is love. It is not easily angered.
Uh-huh.
And it keeps no records of wrongs. That was the little section that I was looking at. So I didn't really get a chance to talk about anger because really they go hand in hand in a lot of ways, right? Forgiveness and anger. The less forgiving you are, probably the more anger and bitterness and resentment you're holding in, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so where does that hit with you guys as far as anger and forgiveness, dealing with that over the years, lessons you've learned, some takeaways, what experiences with anger and forgiveness?
Yeah. You know what's really interesting is back when I was doing services more in like the Celebrate Recovery realm, they said for pastors in particular, they said what they see in the Celebrate Recovery world is anger is usually the biggest thing that pastors face. Like when you're working at church, because, and I don't know exactly why that is. I have some guesses
Yeah.
and assumptions that, like when you're used to kind of holding in you're responsible for a lot of people's, spiritual and emotional well-being in a lot of ways.
Sure.
So you act as a counselor in a lot of ways. You act as sometimes you have to be a sage and just give advice, even if we don't know always. It's like, hey, we have our own experience, and so we're hoping it's the right advice and how we view our relationship with the Lord. But I think anger is a real thing, especially in the church world, because when you feel like there's a lot of things outside of your control, and there's a lot of emotions that you're always dealing with, and you can't really respond to them. You're trying to respond in a healthy way to help that other person.
Yeah.
And I think we internalize a lot of things. So I know for myself, I can feel myself internalizing a lot of those things sometimes, and just it's like stuffing things down, but for the right reasons, because that's what a counselor kind of has to do. It's like you're there to listen, you're there to hopefully advise and give direction, but like sometimes you feel the effects of all that emotion that you deal with from everybody else. Then you've got your own stuff going on too, right? We've all got our families.
Absolutely.
We've all got we're living life the exact same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully, even with our staff team, with people we work with, we've got each other for that. But I noticed for myself, like it's easy to have, outburst moments. I think, especially when it's really difficult and busy weeks. And I sometimes feel like the more I am listening to other people's problems, the more I can just feel that kind of welling up inside myself. So I don't know if that's a familiar feeling for you guys, but I know I just feel that sometimes. It's very visceral.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that when I get angry, it's often because it bumps up against some insecurity that I have. It's like I'm not loving. I don't believe that I'm fulfilling what God has in that season for me. So I think that a lot of it's just impatience with myself, which we talked about patience already. I think that's a lot of it, whether it be in my marriage, whether it be in leading worship, whether it be in teaching or whatever. When I don't feel that. When I don't feel that I'm being valued, or when I don't feel like that I am of as much value as I should be for a particular task, that's normally when that anger comes in. But a lot of it, I think, is I've got to trust that God has placed me exactly where He's wanted to place me,
Right.
and I'm exactly the person that He needs for me in that. I'm exactly the person He's calling me to be in that time, in that season, and He's continuing to grow me. So I think that's the main thing there. Learning to love myself the way God loves me, which is just a whole lifelong skill that we get to
That'll preach.
have that we have the joy of experiencing.
Yeah. You mentioned patience, right?
Yeah.
And that was first thing we talked about. And this is something I didn't get to because for time wise, but the idea of that word patience is really a word for like long suffering, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to have time to, but I just didn't, was to kind of talk about this idea, like when we're in friendships and relationships, we're choosing to be in those things, and we're choosing this idea of we're open to allowing ourselves to get hurt, right? And this is something that we're choosing to long suffer with somebody, even if it's hard, even if it's not always easy. It's a thing that we have to do. We're choosing to do because of the relationship, because we want to be with these people. And that's just another kind of way of looking at patience. It's like I'm choosing to deal even with the junk of people,
Yeah.
even though they're not always great. And as pastors, we make a choice to be in the junk with everybody. Always, we make ourselves available, and we have made the choice not to react to people's messes and junks and hurts, even towards us, that we do have to absorb it, right? We try to absorb it. And I think there's a difference between what you were talking about, the idea of just bottling it up and like just pushing it down versus absorbing. And I think there's probably a healthy way to do it and a not healthy way, right? One leads to resentment, the other leads to maybe more of a peace and a gentleness and things like that. But yeah, how do you guys differentiate, or how do you guys deal with the idea of like, okay, we're supposed to absorb when someone says something, a critical thing, like, man, those lights were just driving me crazy,
which are fixed, by the way. If you've been at church, I have successfully, after months, fixed those stinking lights.
Yeah, and they just kind of give the shot at you or something that you've done. What's the difference between taking that and just kind of stuffing it, going, oh, okay, I can't say anything, like choosing to always respond with grace, and I either stuff it or absorb it. You see the distinguishing things, like how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that the main thing for me is stuffing versus absorbing is how I bring it to God. Ultimately, I think that stuffing is, I take a lot of that criticism. I don't think it's that big of a deal at the time, because it might not be. It might be just like, I could have played a little bit better there, or I could have, put somebody on a little bit more. I could have done something minor. It doesn't really affect me that much. It's just a quick little thing, and I move on. I don't feel like it's worthy to be brought to God, kind of thing. It's like, this is the God of the universe. Why would I why would I bother him with this? But if you let enough of those things stack up over time and get stuffed down over time, then you end up just feeling so defeated and so angry and so and you don't have that, you don't have joy and peace anymore. I think that for me, the biggest thing there is realizing that God is God. He's our friend, like he's our father. He wants to hear about all of those things. Like, I don't have kids, but I feel like if my son was struggling with even the littlest things, I would want him to come to me with those things, right? I mean, it's like, I love you. I want to help you. I want to, it's not a chore for you to come to me. It's really laying all of those things down. Even if they are trivial, even if they are small, coming to God with those things, I think is huge. I think that's the biggest thing that I struggle with, because I don't feel like that they're worthy of being brought to him. But understanding that they are, and it's like, it also helps me fix my perspective on like the perspective that he actually wants me to have in that. Because I often think that it's my work. It's what I'm doing. This is my skill that's being attacked. This is my identity that's being attacked. But ultimately, again, God has me to be the person that he wants me to be in this season. And the results are up to him. So like whatever feedback's coming, like, yes, I can improve, but ultimately going to God with those things helps me remember it's God's. It's ultimately God's. My ministry is God's. My work is God's. My life is God's. And it helps me fix that perspective into a much, much healthier place, where I'm then able to have more peace, have more joy, have more love toward other people, when I know that it's not all about my identity. It's not all about me.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like ministry in general, and you're experiencing that now on this side. You've been doing it for a while now.
Yeah.
And I know Dave's been doing it for a long, long time. I've been doing it for a while. Like ministry in general, it changes how you view relationships, because you have to develop a thick skin regardless, and you have to really separate what is a piece of my identity that's being attacked right there versus what is just something that's really not a big deal. But like everything, when somebody comes at you and you don't have a relationship with them, so like, let's take it back to relationships. We have a relationship with the people in our church, but it's not the same kind of relationship with everybody that you would have with people that are kind of, more in those inner circles of your life. So like you're on the auxiliary of everybody, because you're just, you're known in that space, but you don't have the same depth of relationship with everybody. So if somebody comes to you and it's like, man, this feels like an attack, and I feel like I don't even know you, and that means you probably don't really know me. Sometimes that's just it's a conversation with them, like, hey, let me give you my heart in the matter. And that brings the relationship closer together. Right. But it's really easy And I noticed that, especially in my younger years. Oh my gosh, and it's still hard, but like my younger years, I got real defensive in a lot of things because to me, like any kind of criticism came off as an attack. It wasn't an attack.
Right.
That was just my immaturity coming through. But everything feels like an attack when you're pouring yourself into it and you're trying to do the best job that you can.
Right.
And there's that whole thing in relationships where giving the other person the benefit of the doubt of like, do I believe you have the best intentions? And if I choose to believe that, then I've got a lot more grace for even people that I feel like offend me. It's like I'm going to choose to believe that you have the best intentions and there was just probably something overlooked in the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why relationships are hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you you mentioned being offended. How do you keep from being easily offended? So I think that goes with not being easily angered, right?
Yeah.
So those
Yeah.
two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, because offense leads to anger. So,
Right. So how do you keep from, because some people can be really easily offended.
Yeah.
Other people aren't. What's the secret? What's the trick? What's the tip?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like I tend to be I'm a more sensitive person, I think, at heart than a lot of people are. That's kind of that's the stereotype of musicians. Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of, sensitive, artistic, wear your heart on your sleeve a little bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I don't know how, like I've gotten better at it over time just because I've been so exposed to it. It's like exposure therapy is really the way I've gotten around that because it just happens so often that it became so regular. As weird as that sounds, that it just became less and less of a big deal. It kind of just became part of the job. It's like I just know there's a lot of things that require a lot more explaining to people than what I would traditionally like to do. And I'm also a very change-oriented person. So I also learned that about myself, that like I thrive on change.
Yeah.
Like there is nothing traditional or sacred to me that's a hill worth dying on. There are some things, in orthodox theological beliefs, but like there's just a lot of things I'm very okay with, and I don't have a lot of nostalgic feelings myself. So like, I'm not going to be the person that's like, oh man, remember when we did this? I'm the person that's like, hey, there's a new future ahead. Let's go.
Let's go.
And I believe it's going to be more exciting than where we've been. But not everybody's wired that way. So just understand enough about people that there's a lot of people that are not wired that way. In fact, most people are not wired that way. So trying to empathize with that, like, hey, a lot of people just need a lot of explanation for things because they feel attached to something that I don't necessarily feel attached to, but it's still my job to empathize with that position and to help guide somebody through that. Because pastoring at the end of the day, and even just our relationships with our spouse, with our kids, is about walking hand in hand with somebody, moving at their pace. I think you mentioned that a few sermons ago, and that it's really walking along with somebody at their pace and just being willing to not take offense. You just have to tell yourself, hey, I'm not going to let it bother me. Even if it does, I'm going to at least have a follow-up conversation with that person. And in that conversation, it's really easy to let things roll off because it's hard to be mad at somebody you have a deeper relationship with. It's really easy to be upset with somebody you don't know anything about because then they're just an icon for something that you don't like.
Right.
And it's like, I never want to be an icon for somebody because I didn't want to invest in the relationship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think empathy is a good word to think about. Are we putting ourselves in that other person's shoes and trying to see things from their perspective and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and all those kind of things? I think the better that you can do that, the less offended you'll get and more understanding of, okay, I may not agree. I probably don't agree, but at least I can kind of understand a little bit more of why they said what they said and how they said it and why they said it this way. So
yeah, and the goal is not always agreement, right? It doesn't
it's
have
not
to be.
agreement.
That's great.
It's not agreement.
It's just, but the goal is to be heard and to hear each other out and say like, hey, we still might go this direction because I believe in it, but but I'm hearing you along the way, right?
Yeah.
And we'll take those, concerns into account for sure. But like the same way God loves us, right? That maybe that's the best advice I have. Let me go full circle because I know how many times God has forgiven me and how like when I remember that, then I look at my own kids and like, hey, am I ever going to hold something against them, no matter how many times they bother me over and over again and do the same thing I've told them not to do 1,000 times? Like that's where parenting has taught me more about how God views me than anything else. Yep. It's just like, I still love them. I still can't stay mad at them for too long, no matter how many times they drive me nuts. Yeah. And it's like, that's the way I feel like God probably views me. And if I give myself that grace in God's eyes, then I have to give other people that same grace too. Yeah. And that goes back to the 70 times 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is knowing that the other person's not in your head. They don't have the same perspective that you do. They aren't thinking the same way that you do. I can't tell you how many times I've been this is something I really struggle with, is just like, I'm driving in the car and I'm really mad at something, at somebody, and I'm just like, why did they do it this way? Why, if they know that I don't like that, they know that I have got a big problem with that. And then I almost hear an audible voice saying like, but they don't. But they don't. When have you communicated that? When have you communicated that you have a problem with how that person is responding? When have you told them? How would they know? Right? And my best answer is, well, I thought it. Like, what a
Yeah.
terrible answer. But like, that's what that's how we're wired. That's how we work. We think about, we are in our minds. So it's like, we think that everyone else has at least the same base on which all their thoughts come off of, but we don't.
Sure.
And that's where that empathy comes in. It's like, well, what could they be thinking right now?
Right.
And like, your kids don't think the same way you do. Like, well, how do those, what are they thinking right now? They're hungry and they don't know how to deal with that
They're
emotion.
not. That's
Exactly. It's just like, we don't do a great job naturally as humans of being able to take another perspective. So it's like, that's a skill that we have to grow in over time. And I think that's how we love, is how we're able to empathize and grow in that.
Yeah. I'm curious for you, Dave. How do you do that? You've
Yeah.
been, I mean, being in the role that you're in, right? You get the buck stops here role
For sure.
in a lot of ways. So you get like, when the conversation gets the hardest, that's usually when it falls at your feet. Right.
Sure.
So how have you, like, I'm curious, how have you dealt with that over the
Well, then I
years?
take it to the elders. If,
Well,
yeah,
great.
if I can't handle it. Yeah.
Keep on
Sure.
going.
Buck stops is really good.
Well, yeah.
But I'm on that team as well. But
Sure.
yeah, how do I handle it? I think, I think the empathy is a big piece. I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this without making it sound like I'm more of a superior whatever than the people I'm not going to be offended by. But I think it kind of goes to like, they just don't know.
Right.
They just don't know. And and so the best illustration of this is obviously Jesus on the cross. And he says, "Father, forgive them." Why does he,
Yeah.
what's the reason behind the forgiveness? Because they just don't know what they're
doing.
doing.
Yeah, it's true.
They just don't know.
It's good.
Now we can get frustrated people who maybe act like they do know and say things as if they do know everything, and it's like I get a little bit more angry, I think, with that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's like, don't act like you know what's going on here. You've not been in any of the conversations. You've not been in any of the meetings, and you want to get really mad about something you've heard from somebody else who said something else. And it's like, you just don't know.
It's the best source of information.
Right? Like third-hand information is legit. You
Yeah.
know? It's
Right.
really
Exactly.
good stuff. So I get the most, I think, upset and angry at when people act like they know what they're talking about, when they really just have never been in the meeting. Because the people who have been in the meeting with me on things of that nature, they have a totally different perspective on things and totally different approach because they know. And so so I have to just tell myself, they just don't know. They just don't know. And so they're just probably they're just going off the information they think they know,
Right.
and what they've been told. And I got to tell myself, if I only knew that piece of information and believe that, well, I probably would be acting the same way.
That's a good. Yeah, that's really good.
They're responding. So that's usually my self-talk I have to give myself over and over again.
That's a great relationship rule, though, in general. It's
Yeah, it
like,
is.
how do you avoid hard feelings and anger in a lot of ways? Just go directly to the source. Like,
Yes.
don't ask a friend. Just
Yes.
go to that person.
Yeah.
And probably, I would say, a good chunk of the time, it's not quite what you think or what you've been told.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, going more with the sermon and just talking about forgiveness, we went to Matthew 18. We looked at this incredible story that Jesus tells, another parable of the kingdom of heaven is like kind of thing. And so what resonates with you guys the most in this story? What really, when you think about it, what hits you the hardest? What stands out? What do you connect with the most?
I don't know. I'm throwing it to you, Hank. What you think?
Throwing it to me. Ah,
I know I'm throwing you on the spot here.
I know.
And you didn't have a lot of time to think about it. But as you were listening, I guess on Sunday,
right.
anything stand out?
Just in general, I think the biggest thing is just I like how you talked about the inevitability of it coming back up again. The inevitability of you're going to the things that happen to you, right? That the debt that they owed, it's not like it just goes away, even when you've forgiven it, right? It doesn't just go away. It's going to keep on coming back. So it's ultimately what we choose to do with it. And are we going to choose to allow? Are we going to choose to put it in that owed bin, right? Are we going to choose to let anger and to let all of these other things, the antithesis of all the things we've been talking about the last couple of weeks? Are we going to let that rule our lives, or are we going to let forgiveness be the answer? Like, are we going to let it? Are we going to let the love, the peace, the patience come out in us as a reaction to those situations? And I mean, and I like also how you said it wasn't like a pressuring thing. It's not like it's not a command. It's not a command that God gives us, but boy, would it be great to do that.
Yeah.
Boy, wouldn't it just better ourselves? Wouldn't it just draw us closer to God if we did that? Because that's ultimately what God does for us. And really, the most powerful image is, as we're talking about it Sunday in the parable, is like, as difficult is it for us to move all of the things done against us from the ode to the forgiveness? How much harder must it be for God to do that? Like, how much more do we owe him? How much more does everyone owe him? Yet he wanted to come here and to give himself up for us. Like, he was owed the most and he forgave the most. So what excuse do we have to hold on to the things that are wrong toward us? It's like we look at his example, and that's why I loved singing "Love of God" after that too, because it's like that. It's his love. That's how we're able to do this. It's like just how great is the love of God that he would pay that for us, that he would be kind to us. I mean, of all the things he could be, I mean, we could just wake up every morning saying, "God, thank you for being kind. Thank you for being good," because you don't have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just who you are. Thank you for being a good God. Because I would hate to live in a world where the supreme being over everything is angry.
Yeah. Malevolent,
Yes.
not benevolent.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing, was just connecting those real life examples that I deal with, but then seeing that in the grander perspective of God's perspective, and how he forgave us and how he so perfectly loves us.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, you know what's really funny about that is that I think there's a lot of people that live with a viewpoint of God that affects how they relate to other people. So like, I think, go along with your point, I think if you believe that, God is really just angry with you all the time and demands total justice all the time,
Yep.
I think that does change how we treat and view one another. Like, you can always tell somebody, even in the church world, I think, who has that view of God that's kind of like that righteous anger all the time and everything's about the rule and about the discipline. It's like, those are probably typically the people, at least that I've seen, that tend to probably not love, or that tend to love the least,
Right.
in terms of how they interact with people.
Sure.
Because how we view God really does affect how we view our relationships with one another. If I believe that God is always mad at me, then I'm going to live with a lot of shame and guilt all the time, and that's going to affect how I relate to other people.
Yeah.
But if I truly do view God as like, man, like God is merciful, and like, yeah, there's a justice element to who God is. Of course there is. There is there's a righteous anger side of God when we go against as well. Like there's pieces of God that we have a hard time figuring out how to categorize that and how that affects us. But at the end of the day, what was the ultimate act that God did through the atonement? Was he desired relationship, same thing we're trying to get with one another. He desired that with us.
Yeah.
And to achieve that, he did pay that atoning sacrifice. Jesus paid that atoning sacrifice so that he could love us fully and we could be in full relationship with God.
Right.
So like at the end of the day, when we say like, hey, we're supposed to be a people of love, that's why. It's not that God doesn't get mad at sin and God doesn't, want the world to be a different kind of place. But like, at the end of the day, like, we are to be a people of love because that is how God loved us.
Yeah.
And like that'll preach all day long. Like that should absolutely be how we go about our own relationships with each other.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to love you the same way that I know that God loves me.
Yeah.
And that's going to be messy.
Yeah. Well, let's get in the messiness
Yeah.
of forgiveness just for a minute. What would you say to somebody who says, I just got to keep forgiving this person over and over and over again? Doesn't that make me a doormat? Doesn't that make me like a pushover?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you answer that?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think everybody has to draw their own lines, okay, in terms of love is very different than how I'm going to be treated in a relationship. Like, I can love somebody and not like what they do. So like, your family, you don't get to choose your family, right? I'm not going to throw my family under the bus, but like family is one of those kind of love relationships that you have that you don't get to choose, and you kind of just have to continue loving through it. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know what that
It's
sounds.
the wind.
Oh,
or
that's
it's
funny.
just hitting. Yeah.
I'll edit that out. Keeps
luck.
scaring me every time it happens. So love is one of those things that you don't get to choose. Like, when you love your family, you love them, not because of what they've done, but just because of who they are. There's that blood bond that you have with them. And not everybody loves their family all the time.
Sure.
Like, I get that. So like, I can choose to withhold certain parts of myself from somebody without loving them any less, because it might be for the betterment of that relationship. Like, I don't have to be a doormat for somebody, and I don't have to enable them. I can say, hey, out of love, the same way God sometimes disciplines us out of love, I want the best for you. So I'm going to tell you the truth about what this is. Hey, I'm not going to let you step over me on this, because I love you, because that's not going to lead us to a more loving relationship. Sometimes love is just telling the truth.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just how we wrap that truth, and knowing that, hey, I still care about you, and it's because I love you that I can tell you this truth. So at the same time, though, if I start being bitter towards somebody because they keep offending me, or because they keep doing stuff over and over again, like, that's where working in recovery circles and addiction circles is really powerful, because like, that kind of just goes with the territory of addiction. It's like, you have to learn to love somebody through that, and almost expecting there's going to be a lot of relapses along the way. There's going to be a lot of the same cycle that happens over and over again. But if I get embittered towards that, the only person that really negatively affects is myself. That makes me more cynical. The other person doesn't even know how it makes me feel. But that goes back to that. It's the thing that poisons my heart, and it doesn't really affect them. So there's really no benefit to, not forgiving somebody, because the only person that really hurts is us. Makes us love less.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, what are you really doing, right? Who's it really benefiting? It's I think we oftentimes get in the headspace of like, well, I'm just gonna be mad at them. Well, it's not hurting them anymore, right? And it's not helping you at all. It's like, and forgiveness is ultimately a thing that we have to let go of. I think you articulated it well on Sunday, and something that's the number one lesson I've learned in teaching and discipline is the relationship changes. You can forgive, but the relationship just changes a little bit, and that's okay. It's not that I love you any less. It's just that, well, the relationship changes a little bit.
Consequences.
It's a natural, that's exactly. It's just a natural consequence, and it's like that person that if you've got somebody that just hurts you over and over and over and over again, the answer is still forgiveness. But maybe that person doesn't need to be in that type of relationship with you anymore, right? Maybe they don't get to have that authority over that part of your heart anymore, because they've hurt you that many times, right? And that's hard. That's ultimately where I think that lands, though, is it doesn't make. I mean, I don't think that the fact that someone keeps hurting over and over and over again, that doesn't stop you from forgiving. That just changes that stops you from letting them have that authority over your life in that situation, if that makes sense. Like I like, if I've got a friend that just like is super negative, and it's just like they just constantly are bashing me, then it's like, well, maybe I'm just not your friend. Maybe I'm not your friend in the way that I was your friend before. Maybe I'm not going to spend all my time with you. Maybe I'm going to distance myself a little bit, to not let them have that authority over that part of me.
Right. And that's the hard part with all this, as far as how do you stay in a relationship with somebody that you love, but still protect yourself and hold this other person accountable. Because, love does not keep records of wrongs, but that doesn't mean you can't hold them accountable. It doesn't mean you can't put boundaries up and other things. But that is just it's a tension, right, that you have to figure out. It's a wisdom issue, I think, as far as how much you let them in and how much you trust them after that.
It's going to be determined by their maturity too, because I mean, that they could take like, we're just going to set up this boundary and take that as a complete relationship like break, and it's like, well, it's a case by case basis. It's like, how mature are they going to take that feedback,
right?
And it's like, ideally they're going to take, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that, let me love you better, let me fix this, but that's not the case with all relationships, right? I mean, we would be
usually not, right?
No, right, exactly. So it's so hard. It's so hard when you have sinful people and relationships.
But that rebuilding of trust, and just saying, I want this relationship to get back to where it was and better, but it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. So
Absolutely.
in the meantime, here's some things.
It's hard, because like in the church, we should be the beacon of that, right?
We should be.
We should be the example in the world of what difficult relational love kind of looks like. Like, hey, we know we're all sinful. That's kind of the nature of the church. So like, when people talk about, oh, this church burned me, or this church did something, it's like, and they're all going to some capacity, to some degree, because we're all sinful people in them. But the difference in what the church is and how we relate to one another is we know how sinful we are.
Yeah.
And we kind of know that going into it. But instead we're just committed to it, right? That's the difference, is like, it's that commitment piece. So I'm committed to a relationship
Yeah.
that I know at some point is probably going to burn me in some way, shape, or form. I know there's probably not a person in this room that has not been burned in some way from a church relationship. Like, we all have. It's what we choose to do with that going forward.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just don't want to let that color how I view the church and the kingdom of God going forward, because it just reminds me that we're all in the same place. We're all sinful people trying to follow God.
Yeah. And God loves people.
Yeah.
And that's why we do it, right? And we do it because that's what God's calling us to do, is to love other people, and to be wise about what type of relationships those people are in with us, but ultimately it's to love people. And I think that's the heart of that commitment. And that's what we got to keep reminding ourselves.
That's good. Well, as we wrap up, any final thoughts when it comes to forgiveness or anger that you would say, I'd love to pass along, share a tip or something before we close up?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to, I don't remember what the three were. Maybe you can remind me if you still remember. At one point in your message, you talk about there are three things that happen in that parable, where it's like, you know, it's like the person was forgiven, they didn't have to repay the debt, and then
the servant's master had pity on him.
Yeah, pity. There it is. Yeah.
He forgave the debt,
Yeah.
and then he let him go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that right there is the part that preaches all week long, I think. It's like how when somebody offends us, whether that leads us to anger or resentment, whatever, it's like, man, if we can just, we take pity because we know we could just as easily make that same mistake. We forgive the debt, and then it's we're not going to live embittered towards that. Like, I think that if we could do that in every relationship in our lives, man, we'd be doing really well.
Sure.
So that's great biblical advice.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I mean, it's forgiveness is really, really difficult. But I'd say the main thing I always try to look for is how did God do it? And right back to what you had said, it's, forgive them. That's the last thing Jesus said, right? That's one of the last things Jesus said. It is finished. It's forgive them. And if he can forgive us, then I'm sure we can find a way.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can find a way. We have been given so much grace, and live out of that grace.
Yeah.
That's what he designed us to do.
Yeah, I think that really makes the difference between being the victim and being the victor.
Yeah.
When you can forgive that person, suddenly the story changes. You're no longer the victim in this. Now you have become the victor, in the sense you've overcome whatever that wound was, and you've now forgiven it, and you've risen above whatever that was. Yeah. You didn't have to become enslaved to it. You're free of it. So. And that's what we want for everybody.
Yep.
That you don't have to live in the victim mentality or card the whole life of, this is what they did to me, this is how they hurt me. You can change the story around, and this is how through Christ you were able to forgive that person and move on from it in a healthier, powerful way. So well, thanks for jojoining us. Man.
Absolutely.
Great having you.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
You should just quit your job and do this full time with us.
Keep asking.
Keep trying.
Yeah.
And shout out to Sarah for watching this. I'm sure she's gonna be watching this today. Since
today?
on this, on Wednesday.
Yes, on Wednesday. Yeah, for sure.
So shout out to Sarah. Thanks for all your help as well. And as always, we say the best thing that you can do is to like and subscribe, share this with a friend. And we just love making these videos to help ensure that no one walks alone.
That's right.
And we'll see you back here next week for another installment.